This is the final accident report for Southwest Airlines Flight 1380, adopted by the National Transportation Safety Board on November 19, 2019. An accident report reflects the most thorough and complete findings of an investigation. This narration presents the details as documented by the NTSB Flight and Aircraft Overview on April 17, 2018 at about 11:03 Eastern Daylight Time. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 experienced a failure of its left engine. The airplane was a Boeing 737-7H4, registered as November 772 Sierra Whiskey. The flight was a regularly scheduled domestic passenger service operating under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 121. It had departed from LaGuardia Airport in Queens, New York, with a destination of Dallas Love Field in Dallas, Texas. The airplane was carrying 144 passengers and 5 crew members. It was equipped with 2 CFM International CFM56 7B24 turbofan engines, one mounted under each wing. The Boeing Airplane Company had delivered this aircraft new to Southwest Airlines on July 7, 2000. It was a Boeing 737-700 next generation model. At the time of the accident, the airplane had accumulated 63,521 total flight hours and 37,021 total flight cycles. The left engine serial number 875,134, had been manufactured in December 1997 and installed on this aircraft on November 29, 2012. It had accumulated a total of 67,040 flight hours and 40,569 flight cycles. The left engine was last overhauled on November 14, 2012 at the GE Selma facility in Petrópolis, Brazil. It had accumulated 18,088 hours and 10,712 flight cycles between the time of the overhaul and the accident. The right engine had been manufactured in June 2005 and installed on the airplane on September 24, 2009. It had accumulated a total of 56,448 flight hours and 33,020 flight cycles. The dispatch release for the accident flight showed no deferred maintenance items. Weather and conditions at Philadelphia automated surface observing system at Philadelphia International Airport reported the following conditions at 10:54, about 26 minutes before the airplane landed. Wind was from 290 degrees at 18 knots, gusting to 27 knots. Visibility was 10 miles or greater. There was a broken ceiling at 4,800 feet above ground level and broken clouds at 8,000 feet above ground level. The temperature was 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The dew point was 25 degrees Fahrenheit. The altimeter setting was 29.75 inches of mercury at 11:54, about 34 minutes after the airplane landed. Conditions were similar. Wind was from 270 degrees at 16 knots, gusting to 21 knots. Visibility remained 10 miles or greater. The ceiling was broken at 4,900 feet and overcast at 8,000 feet. The temperature and dew point were unchanged. The altimeter was 29.73 inches of mercury. These conditions indicated that visual flight rules prevailed with a gusty surface wind from the west. A review of pilot reports within 100 nautical miles of the engine failure location found no reports of turbulence or other significant weather conditions. No significant meteorological information advisories were valid for the area at the time. Crew experience and duty context. The captain was 56 years old and held an airline transport pilot certificate with a multi-engine land rating. She had received her Boeing 737 type rating on July 28, 1993. At the time of the accident, she had been employed by Southwest Airlines for 24 years. She had flown as a Boeing 737 first officer before upgrading to captain in September 2000. Before joining Southwest, she had flown A-7 and F-18 airplanes for the United States Navy. She also had experience flying aircraft, providing forest fire support. According to Southwest records, the captain had accumulated about 11,715 hours of total flight experience. This included 10,513 hours in the 737, of which 7,118 hours were as a 737 pilot in command. She had flown 123 hours in the 90 days before the accident, 43 hours in the 30 days before the accident, and 8 hours in the 24 hours before the accident. The captain's last line check occurred on May 3, 2017, and her last recurrent ground training occurred on May 2, 2017. She had no previous accident or incident history, and company records showed that she had not failed any pilot check rides. Regarding her rest history, on April 14, 2018, the captain was off duty and awoke at about 8:00 in the morning Central Daylight Time. She went to sleep at about midnight. On April 15, she awoke at about 8:00 in the morning, commuted to William P. Hobby Airport in Houston, Texas, where she was based. She went to sleep at about 8:45 in the evening. On April 16, she awoke at 5:00 in the morning and reported for duty at 7:30. She and the first officer operated 3 flights, ending their duty day at Nashville International Airport at 8:17 in the evening. She went to sleep by 9:30 in the evening. On the morning of the accident, she awoke at 5:00 and reported for duty at 6:00 Central Daylight Time. The first officer was 44 years old and held an airline transport pilot certificate with a multi-engine land rating. He had received his Boeing 737 type rating on March 17, 2007. He had been employed by Southwest Airlines for 10 years. Before joining Southwest, the first officer had flown T-37, T-1, and E-3 airborne warning and control system airplanes for the United States Air Force. He had accumulated about 9,508 hours of total flight experience, including 6,927 hours in the 737. He had flown 202 hours in the 90 days before the accident, 70 hours in the 30 days, and 8 hours in the 24 hours before the accident. His last line check was on November 8, 2017, and his last recurrent ground training on November 7, 2017. He had no previous accident or incident history and had not failed any check rides. The first officer reported for duty at 6:00 Central Daylight Time on the morning of the accident. He stated that he had slept well and felt rested. Both the captain and first officer underwent required post-accident alcohol and drug screening tests. All results were negative. The accident flight was operated with 3 Southwest Airlines flight attendants. Flight Attendant A was assigned to the forward entry door position and had completed initial training in May 2016, with her last recurrent training in September 2017. Flight Attendant B was assigned to the aft left galley door position and had completed initial training at the beginning of March 2018, about 6.5 weeks before the accident. Flight Attendant C was assigned to the forward galley door position and had completed initial training in June 2014, with her last recurrent training in October 2017. The accident flight occurred on the second day of a 4-day pairing for the captain and first officer. On the day of the accident, the flight crew reported for duty at 6:00 Central Daylight Time and operated a flight in the accident airplane that departed Nashville International Airport at 6:44 Central Daylight Time and arrived at LaGuardia at 9:28. The next flight leg was the accident flight. The airplane pushed back from the gate at 10:27 and took off at 10:43. The first officer was the pilot flying. The captain was the pilot monitoring. Cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder data indicated that the taxi and takeoff were uneventful. At 10:57:36, the New York Center controller instructed the crew to climb to and maintain flight level 380. The climb was uneventful until shortly after the airplane passed through flight level 320 at 11:03:33. Flight data recorder data showed that the airplane's altitude at that time was 32,648 feet. At that moment, the cockpit voice recorder recorded the sound of increased background noise. Flight data recorder data showed that immediately afterward, the number 1 left engine's fan speed decreased from 99.5% to 61.5%, and the engine core speed decreased from 97.8% to 89.8%. The engine's vibration parameters increased. During post-accident interviews, both crew members reported hearing a loud bang and feeling significant airplane vibration. The airplane immediately began an uncommanded roll to the left. At 11:03:39, the cockpit voice recorder recorded the sound of the cabin altitude warning horn. This indicated that the cabin altitude had increased to more than 10,000 feet. Starting at 11:03:42, the recorder captured unintelligible cockpit communications for about 2 minutes. The uncommanded left roll reached a maximum of 41.3 degrees at 11:03:44. The first officer, as pilot flying, began to roll the airplane back to wings level. About 6 seconds later, the left roll was 5.1 degrees, and the roll attitude was generally back under the pilot's control. About 28 seconds later, the airplane was at a level attitude. At 11:03:58, power in the right engine was reduced to idle, consistent with the start of an emergency descent. Power in the left engine was also reduced to idle. At 11:04:09, the left engine fuel cutoff parameter transitioned from run to cutoff, and the left engine began to windmill. That is, the engine fan rotated freely due to air loads from the oncoming airflow. At 11:04:21 and 11:04:28, the controller attempted to issue clearances to the crew. At 11:04:50, the controller stated, "Southwest 1380, if you're trying to get me. All I hear is static." 1 second earlier, the recorder had begun capturing sounds consistent with the crew's use of oxygen masks. During interviews, the crew members reported some initial confusion about the position of the switch that activated the microphone in their oxygen mask. Emergency descent and diversion. At 11:04:54 and 11:05:02, the captain transmitted to the controller, "Southwest 1380 has an engine fire descending, and we're single engine descending. Have fire in number 1. The airplane was descending through altitudes of 28,500 and 28,000 feet at those times. The controller asked which airport the crew wanted to divert to. The captain responded, "Give us a vector for your closest." The controller suggested Harrisburg International Airport and issued a heading of 250 degrees. The captain acknowledged the heading and stated, "We're looking at Philly between 11:05:08 and 11:05:24. The flight data recorder recorded the airplane's peak descent rate of 5,228 feet per minute. At 11:05:32, the captain asked the first officer, "Have you got the aircraft?" She then stated she was going to go through the company's quick reference handbook. At 11:05:52, the controller cleared the airplane direct to Philadelphia International Airport. About 2.5 minutes had elapsed between the engine failure and the clearance to divert. The captain made a public address announcement informing the cabin crew and passengers of the diversion. At 11:06:55, the controller asked about the fire, and the captain responded, "Actually, we're no fire now, but we are single engine." The controller cleared the airplane to descend to 11,000 feet. At 11:07:51, the controller asked whether emergency services should be standing by, and the captain replied, "Tell them roll the trucks. It's on the engine number 1, captain's side." At 11:08:12, after a transfer of communications, the captain declared an emergency and reported descending through 17,000 feet. From the time of the engine failure to 17,000 feet, the airplane's airspeed was between 280 and 300 knots. At 11:09:30, the captain stated, "Tell you what, I'm gonna take it." And flight data recorder data confirmed she had assumed control of the airplane at an altitude of 13,600 feet. The first officer became the pilot monitoring and began the engine fire or engine severe damage or separation checklist at 11:09:52. Communications with the cabin. At 11:11:45, the first officer asked the captain, "We're gonna need a few minutes, right? To run a couple checklists." The captain responded, "Nope, just keep going." At 11:12:28, the first officer removed his oxygen mask as the airplane descended below 10,000 feet. He then removed the captain's mask as well. While the captain communicated with the approach controller, the first officer attempted to reach the flight attendants. At 11:14:36, the first officer told the captain there was no reply from the interphone. A flight attendant later stated she had heard the chime and answered, but could not hear anything because the cabin was too loud. Contact was established at 11:15:04. A flight attendant stated, "We got a window open and somebody is out the window." The first officer asked if everyone else was buckled in, and the flight attendant confirmed that everyone was still in their seats and that they had been helping the injured passenger. She added, "I don't know what her condition is, but the window is completely out." At 11:15:24, the first officer told the captain, "Slow down to 210 knots now." The captain then told the controller responded, "Speed is your discretion." At 11:15:47, the first officer informed the captain about the injured passenger. At 11:15:54, the captain instructed the first officer to continue the checklist. During a post-accident interview, the captain stated that although she had requested a long final approach to allow time for checklists, she decided to expedite the approach when she learned about the injured passenger. Approach and landing. The captain decided to use 5 degrees of flaps for landing because she did not know how controllable the airplane would be. During an interview, she reported experiencing a great deal of drag on the flight controls during the descent. To determine the approach speed, she considered the 160-knot airspeed for flaps 15, the recommended configuration for a single-engine landing, and added 20 knots for an approach speed of 180 knots. The company's quick reference handbook did not provide guidance for a single-engine landing with flaps 5. Between 11:17:04 and 11:17:30, the captain requested that emergency medical personnel meet the airplane on the runway because of a hole in the airplane through which a passenger had gone out. At 11:17:37, the captain told the controller that the airport was in sight, and the controller cleared the flight for a visual approach to runway 27 left. At 11:18:59, the tower controller cleared the airplane to land on runway 27 left and reported wind from 280 degrees at 19 knots with gusts to 25 knots. At 11:19:56, the captain called for the before landing checklist. Starting at 11:20:13, the flight attendants commanded heads down, stay down repeatedly to the passengers. Flight data recorder data showed that the airplane landed at 11:20:30. At 11:20:32, about 17 minutes after the engine failure, the nose gear touched down. The airplane landed at a speed of about 171 knots, with flaps at 5 degrees. Reverse thrust was used on the right engine. For reference, the normal 2-engine approach speed for the airplane's estimated landing weight and wind conditions would have been 149 knots with flaps 40, or 152 knots with flaps 30. Events after landing. The airplane exited the runway via a high-speed taxiway and stopped near a fire truck. At 11:21:43, the captain made a public address announcement advising passengers that a fire truck was approaching the left side and that they should remain seated. At 11:22:26, the captain made initial contact with aircraft rescue and firefighting personnel. At 11:22:41, rescue personnel informed the captain that they were examining the damage and that there were no signs of smoke or fire from the outside. When asked about injuries, the captain responded that there were injuries that needed to be addressed as soon as possible. Between 11:23:57 and 11:24:39, the flight crew performed the shutdown checklist. The captain then entered the cabin and returned to the cockpit by 11:26:01. At 11:25:20, rescue personnel stated that buses were on the way and that paramedics would come aboard to assess injured passengers. At 11:26:20, a flight attendant gave the command to disarm the doors. Passenger deplaning occurred via air stairs, beginning at about 11:51:55. The engine and fan blade details. The CFM 56-7B is a high bypass, dual rotor, axial flow turbofan engine. A single stage high pressure turbine drives a 9-stage high pressure compressor. A 4-stage low pressure turbine drives the engine fan and low pressure compressor, also referred to as the booster. The engine rotates clockwise when viewed from aft looking forward. CFM International was established in 1974 as a partnership between General Electric Aviation of the United States and Safran Aircraft Engines of France, formerly known as SNECMA. General Electric manufactured the CF6 engine, and SNECMA manufactured the M56 engine. Those designations were combined to form the company and engine names. The engine has 24 fan blade slots in the fan disc. Each fan blade has a chord, or width, of about 11 inches at its widest point. The nominal weight of each fan blade is about 10.83 pounds. The fan blades are made of a titanium alloy known as T64. The dovetail portion of each fan blade, which slides into the fan disc, has a copper nickel-indium coating for wear protection. Before this coating is applied, the entire blade, including the dovetail, is shot peened. Shot peening is a process that adds a compressive residual stress surface layer to the material, increasing the fatigue strength and reducing surface tensile stresses that can lead to cracking. All 24 fan blades from the accident engine had the same service history. They had operated as a complete set since their introduction into service in another Southwest Airlines engine in March 2001. No blades within the set had been replaced. The fan blades were last overhauled in October 2012 by Propulsion Technologies International in Miramar, Florida. At that time, the overhaul process included visual and dimensional inspections, stripping the dovetail coating, performing an ultra-high sensitivity fluorescent penetrant inspection, shot peening the entire blade, and reapplying the dovetail coating. When the overhaul was performed, the fan blade set had accumulated 37,382 hours and 21,924 cycles since new. At the time of the accident, the fan blade set had accumulated 55,471 hours and 32,636 cycles since new, and 18,088 hours and 10,712 cycles since the overhaul. The CFM 56-7B fan blade was not certified as a life-limited part. To maintain fan blade loads within the predicted range and prevent wear, CFM recommended repetitive on-wing relubrications of the dovetails. Between November 29, 2012 and April 17, 2018, the fan blade dovetails were relubricated 7 times. The relubrications occurred in July 2013, March and November 2014, July and August 2015, April 2016, and June 2017. Fan blade fatigue crack and metallurgical findings. During the accident flight, fan blade number 13 fractured at its root in what is referred to as a fan blade out event. The dovetail portion of the blade remained installed in the fan disc. Metallurgical examination of the fracture surface found features consistent with a fatigue crack that had initiated on the convex side of the dovetail, about 0.6 inch aft of the leading edge. The fracture surface had a smooth region with 6 well-defined curved lines called crack arrest lines. These lines generally represent changes in stress state, environment, or time interval associated with fatigue crack growth. Ratchet marks formed when 2 adjacent fatigue cracks originate on slightly offset planes were also observed. The 6 crack arrest lines were within a fatigue region that was 0.976 inch long axially at the fan blade surface, with a maximum depth of 0.263 inch. Beyond that area, the fracture surface had a relatively flat plane that was 2.232 inches long axially, with a maximum depth of 0.483 inch. Beyond that flat plane fatigue region, the fracture surface showed features consistent with ductal overstress fracture at higher scanning electron microscope magnifications. Striations consistent with low cycle fatigue crack growth were observed. One striation is usually associated with one flight cycle. For crack growth from a depth of 0.0005 inch to the deepest crack arrest line at 0.263 inch, the number of striations was estimated at 18,400. The estimated total number of cycles from a depth of 0.0005 inch to blade failure at 0.483 inch was about 20,000 cycles. The estimated total cycles of crack growth from crack arrest line number 2 at a depth of 0.068 inch to fan blade failure was about 10,000 cycles. This number closely matched, within 10%, the 10,712 cycles accumulated since the last overhaul in October 2012. This indicated that the fan blade crack had likely initiated before the overhaul. The crack on fan blade number 13 was not detected during the fluorescent penetrant inspection at overhaul in October 2012 for unknown reasons. It was also not detected during the 7 subsequent on-wing visual inspections conducted during fan blade relubrications. 2 fragments from fan blade number 13 were found at the bottom of the fan case between the fan blades and the fan outlet guide vanes. 1 fragment was part of the airfoil, about 2 inches in spanwise length, full width, and twisted. The other fragment was the part of the blade root matching the dovetail, about 12 inches in spanwise length and full width. The total weight of recovered fragments, including the dovetail, was about 8.26 pounds, or about 76% of the nominal blade weight of 10.83 pounds. The blade tip was not recovered. Inlet and fan cowl structural failure. The separated fan blade impacted the engine fan case near the 6 o'clock position and fractured into multiple fragments mechanical deformation of the fan case, which started a high-energy displacement wave. This wave propagated circumferentially around the interface between the fan case and the inlet, causing additional structural damage. The inlet is an aerodynamic fairing, assembly attached to the engine at the fan case, A1 flange, with 24 bolted assemblies. It directs smooth airflow into the engine. The fan cowl is an aerodynamic fairing that encloses the engine fan case and accessories, extending from the aft end of the inlet to the forward end of the thrust reverser. A progressive failure analysis predicted that the aft bulkhead to attach ring joint failed 360 degrees circumferentially due to fastener shearing from the displacement wave, occurring within about 0.021 second after the fan blade release. The initial 70-degree through crack in the inner barrel from blade fragments occurred at about 0.025 second. The 360-degree through crack in the inner barrel from engine rundown loads occurred within 0.5 second. The fan blade's impact with the fan case also transmitted significant loads into the fan cowl through the radial restraint fitting. The radial restraint fitting was located at the bottom of the inboard fan cowl and engaged with a radial restraint bracket on the engine fan case. These transmitted loads caused cracks to form in the fan cowl skin and frames near the radial restraint fitting. This damage propagated forward and aft, severing the 3 latch assemblies that joined the inboard and outboard halves of the fan cowl. Portions of both fan cowl have separated and departed the airplane. The predicted fan cowl failure sequence began at about 0.028 second after blade release and progressed through multiple events in the following fractions of a second. The recovered inboard fan cowl aft latch keeper showed impact damage that matched witness marks on the left side of the fuselage near the cabin window at row 14. The latch keeper had been flung up and over the engine, and the left wing before impacting the fuselage, cabin window departure and depressurization. The exterior cabin window adjacent to seat 14A measured 10.5 inches horizontally, 14 3/8 inches vertically, and 15 inches diagonally. The window assembly included an acrylic outer pane, an acrylic middle pane, and a silicone rubber seal between the panes. 10 spring clips surrounded the window frame. outer and middle panes were structural components that carried the applied pressure load. This accident was the first known complete passenger window loss event for the Boeing 737 fleet. As of August 29, 2019, there had been 33 outer pane fracture events in the 737 fleet and 16 such events in the 757 fleet. But in all of those cases, the middle pane carried the load and the window remained intact. Boeing calculated that the cabin pressure altitude would have been 5,773 feet as the airplane was climbing through 32,600 feet. When the engine failure occurred, the cabin altitude rapidly increased. The cabin pressure controller logged a 10,000-foot cabin altitude status message when the airplane was at 32,610 feet, and a 13,500-foot status message at 32,554 feet. A timeline study determined that the fan blade out event most likely occurred between 11:03:33:1 and 11:03:33:3. The cabin altitude warning occurred about 4.4 to 5.4 seconds after the event. The window could have departed the airplane between 0 and 3.2 seconds after the fan blade out event. Injuries of the 144 passengers and 5 crew members aboard the airplane. 1 passenger received fatal injuries, and 8 passengers received minor injuries. The fatally injured passenger was seated in seat 14A, adjacent to the cabin window that departed the airplane. An autopsy performed by the City of Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office showed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma of the head, neck, and torso. These injuries were not survivable. The passenger's seat belt was buckled at the time. Flight Attendant C, upon reaching row 14, saw that the head, upper torso, and arms of the passenger had been pulled outside the airplane through the window opening. Flight Attendant C grabbed onto the passenger, and with assistance from Flight Attendant A, tried to bring the passenger back inside, but they could not do so by themselves because of the pressure and altitude. 2 male passengers from seats 8D and 13D offered to help. They were able to pull the passenger back into the airplane and laid her across seats 14A, B, and C. The passenger in seat 8D was a paramedic, and the passenger in seat 11C was a nurse. began CPR compressions. Another passenger, described as either a physician or medical school graduate, assisted with CPR breaths. An automated external defibrillator and fast response kit were retrieved from the forward right overhead bin. Supplemental oxygen system. A supplemental oxygen system was located above the flight attendant jump seats and in the passenger service unit above each of the 48 seat sets on the airplane. Each unit contained an oxygen generator, a lanyard-based activation system, a distribution manifold with flexible tubing, and 4 masks. The masks were designed to deploy automatically when the cabin altitude reached 14,000 feet. Oxygen generation began when a passenger pulled a mask toward their face, causing the firing pin to release. Once released, oxygen flowed through tubing into a reservoir bag attached to the mask. All 48 oxygen generators on all seat sets were found activated after the accident. At the time of the engine failure, Flight Attendant A was in the forward lavatory. Flight Attendant B was in the aft galley preparing for in-flight service, and Flight Attendant C was in the cabin near row 5. All 3 heard the loud noise and felt the airplane shaking. Flight attendants A and C went to the forward jump seat, sat down, fastened their restraints, and put on oxygen masks. Flight Attendant B was alerted by a Southwest company employee seated on the aft jump seat, and then sat down and put on her mask. The flight attendants then retrieved portable oxygen bottles from the forward and aft stowage compartments and moved through the cabin to check on passengers. Flight Attendant A noted that some passengers were wearing the mask over their mouth only, rather than over both nose and mouth as intended. Aircraft configuration and airport information. The airplane was configured with 143 passenger seats, 2 flight crew seats, 2 cockpit observer seats, and 4 flight attendant jump seats on double retractable seat sets. The airplane had 6 emergency exits, 4 floor-level door exits, and 2 overwing window exits. It had 24 rows of passenger seats, all with 6 seats per row in 2 triple seat sets, except row 11, which had 2 seats next to the left overwing exit. At the time of the engine failure, the airplane was 29 nautical miles from Harrisburg International Airport and 57 nautical miles from Philadelphia International Airport. Harrisburg had one runway, runway 13 10,001 feet long and 200 feet wide. Philadelphia had 4 runways. The longest, runway 9 right/27 left, was 12,000 feet long and 200 feet wide. The accident airplane landed on runway 27 left. Philadelphia was categorized as aircraft rescue and firefighting Index E, the highest level, requiring at least 3 vehicles with a minimum total of 6,000 gallons of water for foam production, along with additional chemical agents. Harrisburg was categorized as Index B, requiring 1 or 2 vehicles with a minimum of 1,500 gallons of water. Flight crew checklist performance. At the time of the engine failure, the flight crew was primarily focused on maintaining aircraft control during the emergency descent, navigating toward the emergency landing airport, and communicating with air traffic control. The Southwest Flight Operations Manual listed maintaining aircraft control as the first action in all non-normal situations. The engine fire or engine severe damage or separation checklist had 14 items and no immediate action memory items. The flight crew recognized the 2 items needing immediate performance: moving the left engine thrust lever to idle and moving the engine start lever to cutoff. Both were accomplished within seconds. The crew formally began the checklist at 11:09:52, about 6 minutes after the engine failure. The first 5 time-sensitive items were completed within 1 minute and 8 seconds. The last item accomplished was starting the auxiliary power unit at 11:16:16. The flight crew did not formally execute 3 other applicable non-normal checklists: the 1 engine inoperative landing checklist, the cabin altitude warning or rapid depressurization checklist, and the emergency descent checklist. However, some items from these checklists were performed independently. The investigation concluded that the flight crew appropriately balanced the procedural requirement of executing checklists with the high workload associated with maintaining airplane control and accomplishing a safe and timely descent and landing. Emergency landing, airport selection. The investigation found that the straight line distance to Philadelphia at 57 nautical miles was about twice the distance to Harrisburg at 29 nautical miles. However, because the captain could not conduct the emergency descent at the maximum operating speed due to airplane vibration. The time required to descend from flight level 320 would have been essentially the same for either airport. Philadelphia had several advantages. It was a Southwest online airport with greater operational support. It had 4 runways compared with Harrisburg's one. Its longest runway was 2,000 feet longer, providing an additional safety margin for a partial flap landing. And it had the highest level of aircraft rescue and firefighting capabilities. The investigation concluded that the flight crew's decision to land at Philadelphia International Airport was appropriate given the airplane's location, the circumstances, and the airport's multiple runways and firefighting capabilities. Flight attendant actions during landing. Although the flight attendants were aware of the imminent landing, none was in her assigned jump seat. Flight attendant A stated she did not have time to return to her jump seat and sat on the aisle floor near row 4 or 5 with seated passengers holding her down. Flight attendant B sat on the floor in the aft galley, also held down by passengers. Her assigned aft jump seat was occupied by a passenger from row 14 and a Southwest Company employee. Flight attendant C also sat on the floor in the aft galley. The investigation noted that the forward dual position flight attendant jump seat was unoccupied during landing. The investigation concluded that although this was not a factor in the outcome, the flight attendants should have been properly restrained in their assigned jump seats in case an emergency evacuation was necessary. Engine certification and fan blade out testing. The CFM 56-7B engine was jointly certificated by the Federal Aviation Administration and the Direction Générale de l'Aviation Civile of France. The FAA issued the type certificate on December 17, 1996. The Boeing 737-700 airplane was certificated on November 7, 1997, to meet certification requirements. CFM performed 8 development fan blade out rig tests and 2 engine fan blade out containment certification tests between January 1994 and December 1996. For the certification tests, CFM selected the 12 o'clock position as the fan blade release point. The fan blade release position is not specified by regulation. The tests demonstrated that the engine case contained the damage without catching fire, and without failure of engine mounting attachments, and that the engine could be successfully shut down. During the accident, however, the fan blade impacted the fan case near the 6 o'clock position. The investigation found several significant differences between the accident and certification testing. The fan blade fragments that went forward of the fan case during the accident had a trajectory angle between 15 and 30 degrees, greater than the 15 degrees observed during certification tests. The inlet damage was significantly greater, and loads were transmitted through the radial restraint fitting to the fan cowl, which was not accounted for in the fan cowl's design. The investigation concluded that the post-fan blade-out events that occurred during this accident could not have been predicted given the certification tests and structural analyses available at the time. Previous fan blade-out event on August 27, 2016, Southwest Airlines Flight 3472, also a Boeing 737-700 with CFM56-7B engines, experienced a left engine failure while climbing through flight level 310 near Pascagoula, Mississippi. The crew declared an emergency and diverted to Pensacola International Airport, where the airplane made an uneventful single-engine landing. None of the 104 occupants were injured. Fan blade number 23 had separated due to a fatigue crack in the dovetail. The maximum crack depth was about 0.695 inch. The estimated striation cycle count was 15,000 cycles. The fan case had no through-hole penetrations. Inlet portions separated and struck the fuselage, leaving a 16 by 5 inch through puncture below the cabin windows at rows 11 and 12. However, the fan cowl remained in place. Examination of the remaining 23 fan blades on that engine found cracks in the dovetails of 6 blades. As a result, CFM developed an ultrasonic inspection technique and an eddy current inspection procedure for the dovetail, service bulletins, and airworthiness directives. Following the August 2016 event and the April 2018 accident, CFM issued a series of service bulletins, and the FAA and European Aviation Safety Agency issued multiple airworthiness directives mandating inspections of CFM 56-7B fan blades. 3 days after the accident, on April 20, 2018, CFM issued Service Bulletin 7210-33, recommending initial and repetitive ultrasonic inspections for all CFM 56-7B engine fan blades. The same day, the FAA issued Emergency Airworthiness Directive 2018-0951, and the European Aviation Safety Agency issued Emergency Airworthiness Directive 2018-93E. The emergency directives required that within 20 days, all fan blades on engines with 30,000 or more cycles since new undergo an ultrasonic inspection. Any blade with indications of a crack was to be removed before further flight. At the time the emergency directive was issued, Southwest had 279 engines meeting the criteria. All 279 were inspected by April 25, 2018. A crack was found on one fan blade. Subsequent directives progressively expanded inspection requirements and shortened compliance intervals. The repetitive ultrasonic inspection interval was reduced from 3,000 flight cycles to 1,600 flight cycles. The initial inspection threshold was reduced from 20,000 cycles to 17,000 cycles since new. As of June 2018, CFM estimated that about 356,000 CFM 56-7 B fan blades and 14,659 engines had been delivered. All targeted blades had been inspected. 15 cracked fan blades had been confirmed through that date. By August 2019, additional cracked blades had been found. On August 6, 2019, CFM issued Service Bulletin 70-1050, recommending that fan blades be removed from service before 55,000 fan blade cycles since new, even though the blades were not certified as a life-limited part. CFM's analysis of all cracked blades found that the fatigue cracks initiated in areas of high stress on the dovetail, where peak stresses were higher than originally predicted. Contributing factors included coating spalling, higher friction levels when operated without lubrication or a shim, variations in coating thickness, higher dovetail edge loading than predicted, and a loss or relaxation of compressive residual stress. Flight recorders. The airplane was equipped with a Honeywell 6022 solid-state cockpit voice recorder and a Honeywell 40700-256 words per second solid-state flight data recorder. The cockpit voice recorder contained a 2-channel digital audio recording of at least the last 2 hours of operation. One channel combined 3 audio panel sources, and the other was the cockpit area microphone. Each channel contained either excellent or good quality audio, and the data were extracted normally. A transcript was prepared of the recording, which began at 10:52:57 and ended at 12:57:57. The flight data recorder was in good condition, and the data were extracted normally. About 27 hours of operational data were retained, including about 53 minutes from the accident flight. After landing, the captain stated her intention to pull the cockpit voice recorder circuit breaker as required by company procedures. However, based on her comment, "I just pulled all 3." She had most likely pulled the 3 circuit breakers for the flight data recorder instead. As a result, the cockpit voice recorder continued to record, which preserved valuable investigative information. Investigation and hearing. The National Transportation Safety Board was notified of the accident at about 1:07 in the afternoon. On April 17, 2018, an investigative team arrived at Philadelphia International Airport at about 4:30 that afternoon. Chairman Robert Sumwalt accompanied the team. On-scene investigative groups were formed in the areas of operations, power plants, structures, and survival factors. Parties to the investigation included the Federal Aviation Administration, Boeing, CFM International, Southwest Airlines, Southwest Airlines Pilots Association, Collins Aerospace, Transport Workers, Union Local 556, and Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association. The Bureau d'Enquêtes et d'Analyses of France participated as the accredited representative of the state of design and manufacture for the engines. An investigative hearing was held on November 14, 2018. Issues discussed included engine fan blade design and development history, inspection methods and procedures, and engine fan blade out containment design and certification criteria, safety recommendations. As a result of this investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board made 7 safety recommendations to the Federal Aviation Administration. The board recommended requiring Boeing to determine the critical fan blade impact locations, on the CFM 56 7B engine fan case and redesign the fan cowl structure on all Boeing 737 Next Generation Series airplanes. This was Safety Recommendation A 1917. The board also recommended that the FAA require Boeing to install the redesigned fan cowl on new production airplanes and require operators to retrofit existing airplanes. These were recommendations A 1918 and A 1919. The board recommended expanding certification requirements to mandate that airplane and engine manufacturers collaboratively analyze all critical fan blade impact locations and develop methods to ensure the findings are fully accounted for in nacelle design. This was recommendation A 1920. The board recommended that the FAA develop guidance on ways air carriers can mitigate hazards to passengers affected by an in-flight loss of seating capacity. This was recommendation A 1921 to Southwest Airlines. The board recommended including lessons learned from this accident in initial and recurrent flight attendant training, emphasizing the importance of being secured in a jump seat during emergency landings. This was recommendation A 1922 to the European Aviation Safety Agency. The board recommended expanding certification requirements for transport category airplanes and engines to mandate collaborative analysis of critical fan blade impact locations. This was recommendation A 1923. Probable cause. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the probable cause of this accident was a low cycle fatigue crack in the dovetail of fan blade number 13. This crack resulted in the fan blade separating in flight and impacting the engine fan case at a location that was critical to the structural integrity and performance of the fan cowl structure. This impact led to the in-flight separation of fan cowl components, including the inboard fan cowl aft latch keeper, which struck the fuselage near a cabin window and caused the window to depart from the airplane, the cabin to rapidly depressurize, and the passenger fatality. Closing. This concludes the narration of the National Transportation Safety Board's final accident report for Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. The report was adopted on November 19, 2019, under notation 59,687, and report number NTSB AAR 1903. The investigation identified important lessons regarding fan blade fatigue, engine nacelle structural design, and occupant safety during in-flight emergencies. The safety recommendations issued as a result of this investigation aim to prevent similar events in the future.